From the Time Signal, this is Mind the Gap, a weekly essay about the distance between what we say and what's heard, what we intend and what lands, and what falls into the space between. Here's Michael.
There's a sentence people say after they've already said something else. It arrives about a second and a half later and is always delivered lightly, and it runs, "I'm only joking." Notice where it sits. It comes afterwards. The remark has already been made. It has landed. It has been heard by everyone in the room, and it's not going anywhere. So the sentence that follows is not a withdrawal. It does something considerably more useful than that. It leaves the remark exactly where it is and changes what you are permitted to do about it. Psychologists have a precise name for the machinery involved, and once you have it, you can't unsee it. A tease, in the research literature, is an intentional provocation delivered together with playful off-record markers, commenting on something relevant to the target. Off-record markers are the signals that say, not literally. The exaggeration, the grin, the wink, the elbow, the tag itself, only joking, only messing, only having you on. Their function is to make the provocation land as less hostile than the same words if they were spoken flat. Now look at that word again, together. The marker is not an afterthought produced in the wreckage. It's a component. It's fitted as standard, and it was installed before the remark was made. What gets delivered is not an insult that later acquires an excuse. It's an insult and its own alibi, packaged and shipped as a single unit. Now, I want to say plainly and early that I'm not against any of this, because an essay that comes out against joking is a very short essay written by a man nobody wants to sit beside. Licensed insult between the right people is one of the great human technologies. It's how friends say, "I know you, I know the worst of you, and I'm comfortable enough to poke at it." It's a kind of intimacy that particular kinds of men have used for centuries because no other register is available to them. When it works, it's an affection wearing armour. The question is not whether it should exist. The question is how to tell it apart from the thing that borrows its name. Anthropology got here first. In 1940, Radcliffe Brown published a paper called Joking Relationships. Formalised social bonds in which teasing and insult are not merely tolerated, but expected. His phrase for it was permitted disrespect, and it was clear that you cannot think about permitted disrespect without thinking about where respect sits in a society. And he drew a distinction that the rest of this essay hangs on. Some joking relationships are symmetrical. Both parties give and both receive, roughly in equal measure. Others are not. In the asymmetrical form, one person jokes at the other's expense, and the other takes it good-humouredly and does not retaliate, or retaliates only a little, only so far, only within limits everybody understands and nobody states. The obligation is not on the one who speaks, it's on the one who receives. Now, before anyone reaches for a national explanation, this is not one country's habit. It's close to a human universal. In Mali, the institution is called Sanankaya, and it was reputedly written into the oral constitution of the Mali Empire in the 13th century. A civic duty, not a bad habit. In Niger, joking relationships are inscribed on the UNESCO list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, described as a genuine instrument for regulating social tension. So the practice is old, near universal, and demonstrably capable of preventing violence rather than doing it. Any argument that treats it simply as cruelty in disguise is not an argument. It is a man who was slagged once and never really recovered. But look at the conditions under which the honest version operates. In Sanankoya, the relationship is named in advance. Everybody knows who is in it. The stereotypes deployed are standardized, known to both sides, agreed before anybody opens their mouth. And it runs in both directions. You may say the unsayable thing to me because I have the identical license, and we both know the license exists, and neither of us invented this in an afternoon. Now set that beside the version we actually live with these days. There's no prior agreement. There's no named relationship. Nobody's established that the license runs both ways. In fact, the phrase "only joking" is most often deployed at precisely the moment it turns out it doesn't. What you have is a form that claims the authority of mutual play while quietly declining it to be mutual. There is a second test, and it's sharper, and it comes from a linguist rather than an anthropologist. In the 1960s, William Labov studied the ritual insult traditions of Harlem and found something remarkably consistent across communities. The insults were not merely permitted, they were governed. And the governing rule is not about cruelty or subject matter, it's about truth. Ritual insult has to be false. It is extravagant, fanciful, self-evidently impossible. That's the art of it. And the more magnificently untrue it is, the better it plays. The same rule appears in comparable traditions elsewhere. In the West African forms Lavov's successors compared it to, remarks tend to be built from invention rather than from a person's actual traits. But say something specific and true and to another person's discredit in front of an audience, and you're no longer sounding. Labov found that participants had a different word for that. It was a different act, and they knew it, and they never confused the two. Sit with that, because it inverts what most of us assume. We think the joke that lands hardest is the one that goes closest to the bone. The traditions that have been doing this for centuries say the opposite. The bone is where the game stops. Truth is the tell. A slagging about something invented as play, slagging about a thing the person could change tomorrow if they could, is not a slagging at all, and every person in the room knows it while continuing to call it one. Which brings us to the part that is measurable. In 1998, Dasha Keltner and colleagues coded teasing amongst fraternity members, ranked by status within the house. The low-status members teased in markedly more pro-social ways. Less threat to the other man's face, more repair work built into the remark. Teasing was more frequent and more hostile when it came from the high-status men. And across the board, the targets reported more negative emotion than the people doing the teasing. Read that again with last week's episode in mind. 2 weeks ago, I described the authority gradient on a flight deck, how a warning gets softened as it travels uphill, until it arrives too polite to act on. Here is the same slope, running the other way. Information going up gets hedged. Aggression coming down does not have to be. The people at the bottom soften because they must. People at the top don't because nothing requires it of them. The perception gap has been measured too. Robin Kowalski had people write 2 accounts, one where they were teasing, the other where they were being teased. The same people describing both roles. As perpetrators, they judged the incidents funnier and less damaging than they did when they were the targets. They also reported more guilt, which tells you the people doing it are not usually a monster. Some part of them knows. They call it a joke anyway. In the second episode of this season, I said that silence is always longer for the person responsible for it, that you and the other person are not in the same silence. The same thing is true here, and it is worse because at least both parties agree that a silence happened. You're not both in the same joke, and only one of you gets to say which joke it was. That's the door to the real damage, and it's not the remark. Consider what the frame does to the person on the receiving end. It hands them the judgment and loads the dice. Was that cruel, or am I too sensitive? Nobody else in the room seems bothered. He's a decent man. He didn't mean it. He was only joking. And every route out of that question is closed, because to conclude that was cruel is to accept the label of the person who cannot take a joke, and that label costs more socially than the original remark ever did. So there are 2 moves, and they both lose. Object, and you have proved the point and added humorlessness to whatever they were already saying about you. Absorb it, and you've licensed the next one. There's no exit inside this game. which means the only reliable way to stop being the target is not to be the one who is chosen. That is the one variable you do not control. Do that to somebody weekly for a year and you've not hurt their feelings. You've trained them out of trusting their own read of how they were being treated, which is a far more durable injury than any single sentence. And it is entirely invisible, and it does not leave a mark that anyone can point to. That is why this belongs in a serious essay rather than a funny one. There is research suggesting that the habit of waving jokes away as just jokes does its damage in two directions at once. It loosens the restraint on the person telling them, and it gets inside the person they are told about. The institutions have started to notice, which is usually the last stage of anything. One British employment law firm found the number of tribunals in which the defence was that it had only been banter rose by nearly half in a single year. A Leadership Institute survey found a fifth of people who had been embarrassed by workplace banter, a tenth had begun avoiding situations at work because of it, and 1 in 25 had left a job over it. And the law, at least in the United Kingdom, has arrived at a position worth memorising. Everyone knowing that it was a joke is not a defence, which is a legal way of saying what the ritual insult traditions worked out centuries earlier. Intent is not the test. The frame is not the test. So here are the two tests, and they're not mine. One belongs to a linguist in Harlem, and the other to an anthropologist in 1940. And between them, they're older and better than anything I could offer you. Is it false? A remark that is extravagantly untrue is a game. A remark that is precisely true about the thing a person cannot change is not, whatever it's called afterwards. And can they return it? Not are they allowed to in theory, but can they in that room on that day without it costing them something? If they can, it's play, and it is one of the better things that people can do to each other. If they cannot, then the joke was never the point. The joke was the delivery system. One question to take with you this week. Think of a person that you slag quite freely. If they said the same thing back to you tomorrow, same words, same room, same audience, what would it cost them?
Mind the Gap is written and presented by Michael Comyn and produced by the Time Signal. Back next week with the next gap.